What if the Avengers were magic cards? Next on Commander Replay. Welcome back, everyone. Today we're asking the question, what if the Avengers were magic cards? So I've come up with a bunch of really fun designs that I think evoke the flavor and the feel of each of the Avengers and put them into a magic card so we can have fun seeing if I accurately captured the feel and the flavor of each Avenger. So first things first, I know a lot of people aren't a fan of the crossovers in Magic, and to be honest, I'm not either. Some people like the Godzilla cards, a lot of people really didn't like the Walking Dead cards. I wasn't a fan of either of them. I do like my Magic cards to be set in the Magic universe, so I'm not saying that this is something that we should do, or that I would like to see happen, but it was just a fun exercise to go through and see if I could accurately capture the feel of each Avenger on a Magic card. Now, when choosing the colors for each card, I basically just used the color of their suits and applied that to the card, but that doesn't necessarily match abilities that would fit that character that are in the color pie. So where I could, I tried to stay within the color pie for each color, but there's definitely a few spots where I had to go outside of the color pie, just to more accurately capture the character on a card. Now, one final thing before we get going, I have not playtested any of these cards. You would definitely want to make sure they're strong and exciting, but not too strong in that they're format warping. So yeah, you would definitely want to tweak the dials on some of these before shipping them off to print. But with that, let's get going. First up, Captain America himself. 3 in Jeskai for a 4/3, Menace, First Strike, Haste, Vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for Cap's shield. If you do, attach it to Captain America and shuffle your library. And finally, Captain America can block an additional creature. So the general flavor I got from Captain America is that he's kind of the first one into the fight. He's always fighting like 3 or 4 things at a time. So I went for a really heavy keyword-based commander where he's going to be fighting and blocking multiple things all the time. And of course, when he comes in, he finds his shield and attaches it to himself, which is a big part of his game plan. So 4/3 by itself may seem a little bit small initially, but when we look at the shield, and the shield is Jeskai to cast, but likely will be coming in off of Captain America's ability. It says, equipped creature gets +2/+2, so Captain America would normally be like a 6/5 in combat, but the other abilities, prevent all damage that would be dealt to equipped creature, which is a really cool ability, and then, you may pay a red and unattach Cap shield, to throw it at another creature and do 2 damage to that creature, or you may pay a white and a blue to attach Cap shield to a creature you control, so that way you can prevent all damage that will be dealt to it. So Captain America going to be really adept at fighting a lot of creatures in combat, but you get to make a lot of cool decisions about what you want to do with the shield also, so there's just a lot of fun things you can do with those activated abilities. Anyway, Captain America and his shield were some of the first designs that I did, and I'm actually really happy with the way they turned out. Moving on, next up we have the God of Thunder himself, Thor. 7 mana for a 7/7 flying indestructible trample. When Thor enters the battlefield, you may search your library for Mjolnir. If you do, attach it to Thor and shuffle your library. Whenever Thor attacks, it deals damage equal to its power divided among any number of target creatures. So Thor really takes a lot of punches with seemingly no consequences through most of the movies, so definitely indestructible. And then the main problem that I had figuring out with Thor is what abilities should be on him and what abilities should be on his hammer. And generally when Thor fights, it seems like he's throwing lightning and his hammer everywhere, so I wanted to evoke some of that feel of just shooting a lot of different things with lightning and being able to hit a lot of targets at once. But of course, let's take a look at his hammer, Mjolnir. That's not Mjolnir. That's Mjolnir. Equipped creature gets +3/+0, you can unattach Mjolnir, and it does 3 damage to target creature, a literal lightning bolt in Magic. Or you can pay blue, red, tap each creature opponents control, and Mjolnir does 3 damage to each of them. This is kind of the ground pound or some of the area of effect type attacks that he does throughout the movies. And finally, 0, attached to Thor. Notably, you can't naturally equip it to other creatures. Sure, there's a few ways to circumvent that in the game, but I thought that was an interesting touch to put on it. And one final thing that I did find interesting while watching video to get inspired for these cards is that most of Thor's fighting occurs with the hammer. Spoiler alert, there's a whole bit that occurs in one of the later movies where he's trying to figure out who he is after his hammer gets destroyed. And from what they show in the movies, he doesn't do a lot in any of the movies without the hammer, so that did make it a little bit tricky while trying to design Thor himself, because most of the cool stuff he does involves the hammer. Moving on, next up we have Black Panther. 6 mana for a 5/6 indestructible. When Black Panther enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a card and put it into your hand. If you do, shuffle your library. Then, you may pay black and tap an untapped creature you control, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, activate this ability only at sorcery speed. So with Black Panther, I definitely wanted Indestructible because with the suit on, he's another character that takes an absolute beating in the movies and is generally fine as a result. But two, the thing that I really wanted to capture is the fact that Nakia is working with him and giving him lots of cool gadgets as he needs him to go out and do his missions. So I thought that that would be best captured as a tutor effect, and being able to repeatably tutor is really strong. Next up, we've got Iron Man. 6 mana for a 6/6, flying, haste, indestructible. Whenever Iron Man attacks or blocks, you may search your library for an instant with converted mana cost 4 or less, and cast that card without paying its mana cost. If you do, shuffle your library. So flying, haste, indestructible, I thought were all really fitting based on what we see in the movies, but again, with Iron Man, I wanted to also capture the toolbox nature of what he does throughout the movies, because he always has tricks at his disposal. I thought that an effect that's very similar to Sunforger would evoke that really cool toolboxy feeling that I think would be very Iron Man-esque. Because one of the things I also wanted to avoid is, with a lot of the characters that shoot stuff, one of the easiest ways to incorporate that into a card is just do damage to a creature, but basically what would happen is every character would have some version of do damage to a creature, so I wanted to make it just a little bit more interesting than that. So with this ability to search for a spell, you can potentially get something that shoots creature, but you can get something else if you need it too. So I really like this Iron Man design, I think this one came out really cool. What do you guys think? Next up, we've got Spider-Man. Blue, red for a 4/4, has haste, reach, can't be blocked, and when it deals combat damage to a player, that player cannot cast instants or sorceries during their next turn. And finally, you may pay a blue, tap target creature, it doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So there was a lot of things I wanted to capture with Spider-Man. I wanted to capture his speed, agility, and his nimbleness when he's swinging around from building to building, so I thought that would be best captured by can't be blocked. Reach I threw in there just because it's the spider ability in Magic, and I thought it would be fun, even though it doesn't fit the color pie right here. And then for the other two abilities, obviously the activated ability is him shooting his webs at stuff and gooing them up for a turn so people can't use their creatures. In Magic, this is known as the ice effect, but I thought it was really fitting for Spider-Man. And then the main thing that you see with Spider-Man is he's always kind of gumming up the works because of his agility. He's always able to kind of like get to the thing and just cause a lot of trouble. So I wanted an ability that causes trouble for opponents, and that's where I ended up with the they can't cast instants and sorceries during their next turn if Spider-Man deals damage to them. Up next, we've got Black Widow, 5 mana for a 4/4, first strike, death touch, menace. Whenever Black Widow deals damage to an opponent, each opponent discards a card. And finally, pay black and tap an artifact you control. Destroy target creature with toughness 4 or less. So Black Widow, very much an assassin type character, and I wanted to capture that. There are a number of assassins in the game of Magic, and they all deal with destroying creatures in some way or another. I wanted to try and make that as interesting as I could, and I thought that First Strike, Death Touch, Menace was a really cool combination of abilities to kind of show how she fights, where she kind of uses that agility to take on multiple creatures at once. And I noticed in her fights, she's very resourceful and doesn't stick to a single weapon. She tends to be throwing a lot of things or just using her surroundings in a lot of different ways, which is where I came up with the tap an artifact you control and destroy target creature with 4 or less. Essentially her throwing knives, throwing whatever's near her, if she has guns or other random things at her disposal. I thought this was a neat little way to kind of embellish on that assassin ability and her resourcefulness as a character. And finally, I wanted to give her an ability that would force you to want to block her instead of just taking the 4 damage, because First Strike, Death Touch, Menace is going to make it very costly to block, so I wanted something equally or even more costly on the backside if you don't block. And that's where I ended up with this each opponent discards a card ability. Originally I had this as the player you hit discards 2 cards, but that did seem a bit strong and a bit punishing. And then I settled into this each opponent discards a card, so it's still stronger than a single discard, which didn't feel quite strong enough, but each opponent discarding means that someone else may also want to interact with it before it deals damage to someone. And originally I had haste as a keyword on Black Widow, but with that discard ability that was feeling a bit too strong and a bit too much like Rankle on steroids, which I don't think anyone really wants. So got away from the haste, but I would say that this is one that probably requires a bit more playtesting than some of the others, trying to get the mana cost just right, with the power and toughness, with that discard ability, with the fact that it's going to kill a lot of creatures. if you're trying to block it. So cool design, but playtesting definitely needed. Next up, we've got Bruce Banner, Teamer for a 2/2. When this card enters the battlefield or transforms into Bruce Banner, draw a card. And then it has Enrage. When Bruce Banner is dealt damage, transform it. So Bruce Banner, obviously going to be a transform card, but I did also want to capture the fact that he is one of the more cerebral Avengers. So we have this ability to repeatedly draw cards, either when he ETBs or when he transforms back into Bruce Banner, which I thought was a cool little take on it. And initially I had a mana cost to also allow him to transform, but I decided that it would be a neat little hoop to jump through if you can only transform him with the Enrage mechanic. So then of course we transform into the Hulk. So with the Hulk is another big bruiser, do lots of damage type creature, but I also wanted to differentiate it from a lot of the other characters. So where I ended up was an 8/8 Trample Rampage 3. You guys remember the Rampage mechanic? If you don't, it says, for each creature beyond the first blocking this creature, it'll get plus that number until end of turn. So when the second creature blocks the Hulk, it'll get +3/+3, the third creature it'll get +6/+6. It's an old mechanic that hasn't been used in a really long time, and generally isn't very good, unless you put the lure ability on it, which says all creatures able to block the Hulk must do so. So now, that ability allows the Rampage ability to actually trigger, so the Hulk will get bigger and kind of smash his way through a bunch of creatures as you go to combat. And then I wanted a protection ability on the Hulk, and I ended up with, if the Hulk would be destroyed, regenerate it. And I just thought that that was a little bit more exciting than putting Indestructible on it, a little bit more flavorful, since he's not wearing a mechanical suit like some of the other Avengers. And then finally, at the beginning of your end step, if the Hulk didn't attack this turn, remove all damage from it and transform it. So yeah, when you flip into the Hulk, you have this big trampoly rampaging thing that it's going to force all their creatures to block. It's going to get huge while it does so. It's probably still going to trample over for a bunch of damage. It'll regenerate if it needs to automatically. But then if it doesn't attack, it transforms back into Bruce Banner. That remove all damage bit is just to prevent the situation where if he has damage marked on him and he transforms back into a 2/2, he might die as a result of that transformation. So I thought it was just easier to remove all the damage before he transforms, just to prevent any kind of weirdness in that way. But the regeneration ability also leaves a cool window of opportunity for your opponents where they can destroy it and it'll tap itself as a result of regenerating, and that being the case, he won't be able to attack and then he'll transform back into Bruce Banner. So I feel like that adds a little bit of cool unpredictability to the Hulk, because there should definitely be some of that as well. Moving on, next up we've got Doctor Strange, 4 mana 4/4, and it says, whenever one or more creatures attack you, you may choose a creature attacking you and have it attack another player instead. You can pay 1 blue-red to draw 2 cards and discard a card, and then you can pay 5 blue-red, end the turn. So I knew with Doctor Strange I wanted a character that was really tricky and kind of manipulative. So if you get attacked with a creature, you can change one attacking creature, and that's kind of the sending it through a portal ability. The draw 2 cards ability was really just to kind of represent, again, that he's another one of these cerebral type characters. And then finally, the end the turn ability is to show his ability to manipulate time. One of the things that I realized very quickly is that if you just put take an extra turn on him, he would basically go infinite by himself, because you would take that extra turn, untap your lands, and just be like, okay, I guess I'll do that again. And that'll cause a loop where if your opponents are tapped out, they won't be able to stop it. So I thought ending the turn is a cool way to manipulate time without just immediately going infinite by itself, but is a really cool and powerful effect. Now, this is another one where playtesting definitely needed. This is the type of card that can very easily get overcosted or undercosted, so you would definitely want to test this one out a bit before shipping it off to print and making sure you get the numbers just right. And next up, we've got Ant-Man. 1 red for a 3/3 with Menace. Whenever Ant-Man attacks, you may search your library for an insect creature and put it onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. And then, you may pay 1 red to turn Ant-Man into a base power and toughness 1/1 that can't be blocked until end of turn, or you can pay 5 red to turn Ant-Man into base power and toughness 10/10 and gain trample until end of turn. So obviously you're going to manipulate your size. There's a lot of cool little things to do here. Early in the game you would probably make it unblockable and just get some other insects in tapped and attacking. And then late in the game, as you have more mana, you make him huge and make him a 10/10 with trample. I did do a quick search. There are a number of red insects, but many more of them are green in the game, so you could certainly make the argument of whether you should add the color green if you're using that insect ability. But on the other hand, shapeshifting is typically more of a blue thing. So if you wanted to stay in the color pie for the getting bigger or getting smaller abilities, you'd probably add blue. But it just seems to work out that a lot of the Avengers have blue or red on their suits anyway, which means I already had a lot of Is It Avenger commanders. So I decided to go mono red for Ant-Man just to keep it a little bit more interesting and differentiate it from the others. But you could certainly make an argument to add some colors to Ant-Man to evoke different things. And finally, at last, the final Avenger, Captain Marvel. I knew with Captain Marvel, I just wanted something crazy strong and over the top, just heinously OP, so here's what I came up with. Double Wooburg to cast. For a 12/12 flying indestructible trample hexproof, when it enters the battlefield or attacks, add 5 energy counters. You may spend 5 energy counters, search your library for a permanent card, put it onto the battlefield. You may spend 10 energy counters, and Captain Marvel does damage equal to its power to each opponent and each creature they control. So 1, this is the energy commander that everyone wants, and obviously it would just be ridiculously strong. To the point where, if you're trying to build a fun energy deck, this wouldn't be the commander to do it because the commander's so strong that the rest of the deck isn't gonna matter at that point. But I did like the energy counters idea just because one of her abilities is the ability to manipulate energy fields. And that was probably the best way to capture the flavor of her ability in some way, because she kind of just does everything, like she's way too strong to really capture into a card accurately, so at least playing with the energy counters ability a little bit gives you something. And then I went for tutor a permanent just because I wanted something ridiculously good, and then the damage to each creature and each opponent also because I wanted something ridiculously good. There's obviously other ways you could go about it. If you wanted it to be OP in different ways, you could go for like more of an infinite mana type feel, or more of like draw too many cards out of your library type of thing. There's a lot of different ways to go about it, but this is what I came up with as my "this Avenger is way too strong" card design. So anyway, I'm gonna wrap it up there. What do you guys think? Did I nail the flavor mechanically for each Avenger, or could I have done something different? Let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and as always, feel free to comment, like, or subscribe. Thank you for watching. I want to thank my awesome Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome. If you want to help support the channel and vote on which decks I play next, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below.